I hit record. Hey, Jonathan, thank you so much for jumping into the podcast, man. This is great.
It is an honor to be here in Sam Show Nation.
Oh, man. Jonathan, I want to say this up front. Now, I want to sit down and we're going to go to the full gambit of this interview. But if you allow me a few seconds just to fanboy out just a little bit, just a little bit before we jump into it. Because one of my all-time favorite shows, easily in my top 5, is Seinfeld. I love it for every reason imaginable. But when I, especially getting into this interview, I was just watching Seinfeld just to watch it. But you are the unofficial cast member of Seinfeld, because without you, the theme songs, the vibe is off. Without your music, Seinfeld is essentially a very, very dark look at 4 very different individuals. Without the laughs, without the, for lack of a better term, and if I don't mean to be offensive with it, but just that offbeat style of music that was very different at the time. So I want to thank you for doing the show, mainly because I think better people have interviewed you than me have said it. Your music changed the dynamic of essentially television, not just with that show, with other things you've done as well. So that is a long-fisted way to say, welcome to the podcast, Jonathan. Love to have you here.
I'm so glad. You know, so much time and distance has passed since those Seinfeld production years that now, like you, Sam, I kind of view the show as a fan. And that is exactly how I approached making the playlist for the soundtrack album. What would a fan really like on this album? So that was the main criteria for choosing stuff for the album.
Well, let's back it up for a second before we jump into Seinfeld, before we get all crazy with that. Let's start with you. Like, where did you grow up? Where's this beacon of talent come from? Tell me about yourself a little bit. I mean, you're more than just the music. Don't get it twisted. You're good. But yeah, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up?
I was raised as a child in what at the time was a very small pond in Louisville, Kentucky. I got great music training, really thorough, really eclectic music training. I started in a conservatory and then had private teachers. There was nobody in my family who were artists or musicians of any kind, but they were really supportive. So in this, at the time, kind of little community of musicians in Louisville, I got really valuable, practical, professional experiences as a child. Basically, I joined the union at 13 because I was already working in the hotels. And by the time I was through with high school, I was doing all the studio work in Louisville. I was writing music for the radio and TV stations. So I had a lot of really good experience before I moved to LA. I was 17.
Now, when you sit down and you're watching, well, let's start there. A 17-year-old is holding it down in the Louisville area, period, point blank. That's already an accomplishment because, I mean, most people haven't even declared a major in college and you're just like, all right, this is my career. I'm good. What you had to look like this, I don't know, young buck to your contemporaries. How was that feeling when you know, 1 year from a driver's license and now you're holding down the entire Louisville, Kentucky music scene?
We're in agreement that was weird.
Okay.
That a kid was doing this work, but there wasn't a whole lot of competition for those jobs. At the time, in the mid 70s, production music for radio and TV came from larger markets, from nearby Cincinnati, Nashville, Indianapolis. And I saw a need for local delivery of it. I could move fast. I could do it cheap. So that is how I kind of elbowed my way into those doors. And I didn't go to school much. I was busy working, so I was not a particularly great high school student, but it prepared me. It was on the job training for what came next in LA. And yes, it was a little weird. And you pointed out a good thing, Sam, that in Louisville, I was well known. I had a reputation. People respected me. I could have lived my life and my career like that as a local musician. And I'd have been happy. That would have been a pretty good choice for me. But you know how when Harry Potter turned 17 and he had to go someplace else? Well, that was me too. I just felt this magnetic pull towards LA, and I had to follow. There were all these massive events with gravitational pull happening. For example, Herbie Hancock was recording with Stevie Wonder in LA. And Michael McDonald was recording with the Doobie Brothers in LA, and Ramsey Lewis was recording with Earth, Wind and Fire in LA. All of these seismic events were happening. It was a party and I should be there. Maybe the biggest was when Joe Walsh joined the Eagles, and I just could not resist anymore. It was as if I was being summoned to LA for the next step. So I moved to LA. I was 17 and landed there and started working.
So now that you got this beacon to go to LA, I mean, it didn't always start with Seinfeld. I did a little digging. I mean, you made music for Caroline in the City, Who's the Boss, Will and Grace, just to name a few. Perfect Strangers, Fantasy Island, so Falcon Crest, Love Boat, just to name things you worked on. And one of the things, like the unofficial themes of this podcast is we're good with pop culture. So every now and then in the podcast, myself or any guest, my boy BK or whoever the regulars are, we will honestly name a theme song and just break in a song, because that time, that late 70s, early 80s vibe of music and television meshed. It was like, if I couldn't get you in a theme song, it wasn't worth watching the show. So was that what led you to LA? Was that the thing? Like, I want to work in TV, or was it a musical aspect, or a marriage of the two?
I was 17. I had no idea where I was headed. There was no clear path. When you're 17, you think you're going to live forever, so you're willing to take crazy risks. In my case, these were positive risks. So yes, I did love screen music. I would think I was 5 years old the first time I heard Henry Mancini's Pink Panther. And from that moment on, it was a lifelong love affair with screen music, and it defined for me the word cool.
Okay.
You know, that music, you hear it and then go, that is cool. Now I know Miles has Birth of the Cool, and there are all these other things that are cool, and there's Cool in the Gang. But for me, that really connected me to that word, because all the other kids in my preschool class like to use that word, and I had no idea what it really meant.
It's more of a feeling than a word. You just
that feel. Thank you. But that feeling, man, it hit me hard when Henry Mancini reached out to me the same way that the artists on the radio did. And that certainly had an influence on the next 12 years of my life in Louisville. I became more interested in what was going on in film and TV music. And of course, about the same time as Pink Panther, those Sherman brothers were schooling me on clever songwriting. Mary Poppins came out. Now it's all about those songs.
So, like, here's what I'm noticing right now, and correct me if I'm wrong. You were inspired by pop music at the time, and I don't want to age you. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying there's a level of pop music and there's a level of classical, I guess, jam in you, because some of the reference you gave out, and I was doing a little digging. And in previous interviews, you were taught piano lessons by Jamie Hammerson at a very young age.
My initial piano studies were before I met Jamie. I met Jamie, I think I was about 12.
Okay.
So for those 5 years, I became a Jamie Aebersold disciple. There were 4 of us who were raised in his basement. Now that sounds creepy, Sam, but it was not. It was awesome and wonderful that he used us as his lab rats to create his approach to jazz education, which is now global. And what a wonderful experience that was, to be challenged. Every day I would go in that basement and just be challenged. Okay. You know, as I'm a parent, I don't know. Are you a parent, Sam?
Yes, I am.
So
I'm surprised my son have not jumped into this interview yet, but we're good.
There, well, we as parents spend some energy talking about the dangers of negative risks. You know the list: drugs and binge drinking and unsafe sex and texting while driving. We know the list. It's boring and we repeat it over and over again. Right. But what happened in Jamie's basement was positive risk. I was constantly playing with superior players, and the music was never easy. He would always challenge us. If we got too comfortable with giant steps, he would change the key on it. And it was terrifying, but that confidence that comes from fighting through that scary moment with courage and coming out the other end, it is what we want for all of our kids, is to find their voice. And that helped me find my voice in that basement. By the way, Jamie, who is a world-class musician.
I was just about to get to that. Yeah.
I don't know if you ever heard him play, but by the way, yesterday he turned 82, and he still is swinging. But he didn't make his living from being a world-class musician. He made his living as a world-class business person. And even at my young age, I looked at him and I pointed and said, I want that. That's what I want. I want to be able to make money as a business person and be a great musician. And I took that mentality, that connection between commerce and art, to LA with me.
Now, here's where I get, I have 2 follow-up questions from there, because we're going to jump back into you getting.
Oh, by the way, I'm going to interrupt you. I want to thank you for mentioning Jamie Aebersold. Truly a mentor.
Now, that's the reason I'm getting at that. I say young age, you're 12. Did you know of his pedigree? Did you know of it? Well, you probably know of his skill because you're there with him, but did you know of his reputation? Did you know, or was this just quote unquote piano lessons, you know?
Yeah, it was not piano lessons. He's not really a piano teacher. This was jazz training.
Okay. But
and it was usually part of a group. There were a group of 4 of us that we trained. And I only knew by reputation locally, because remember, this was before he was famous. The year right now, in case you're listening in the future, is 2021. I am 62.
Okay.
And this was early 70s, and Jamie was not a household name yet. There was no internet, so he mostly owned the back 4 pages of Downbeat magazine. But even at that age, as soon as I walked in, I knew that this was special, that he was a special kind of a teacher. And even things like the basketball at his house. First of all, Jamie's a serious baller. And we would take breaks, go out, play basketball. What's that?
I have to ask, even still at 80, he's still doing it?
Well, he has some age-related issues, so he no longer plays in games, but he can still, I mean, he'll hit 30 free throws in a row. He shoots threes like crazy. You can't leave him open or he'll punish you for it. But even that was a lesson for us, because just like in basketball, where you got to make your best play away from the ball, you get better by playing with superior ballers. In jazz, there are no notes when you're improvising and everybody else around you is doing the same thing. It's like a moving court, and you have to learn to improvise in music the same way you do in basketball. So it was all a wonderful learning, challenging, growing experience for me. And because of that adrenaline that was always happening at Jamie's, I never felt the need to do drugs or alcohol or anything else on that negative risk list.
Makes sense. So now you got this. You have this unusual, for lack of a better term, but positive backstory. You held down Kentucky. You got the call in to go to LA. What is your first move in LA now? I mean, you got chops, clearly. You're young, you're 17, school involved, or you just LA just to be in LA? Tell me what's going on in your head at that time, Jonathan.
Well, I pretended to go to college for a few weeks at USC. I had a 4-year ride there, but I got busy almost instantly doing work for the studios. I got so big, it was a question between, let's see, do I spend 8 hours under headphones playing on records, or do I go to my English 101 class? So school lost out on that. I did have another mentor after Jamie when I moved to LA. You join the union. I switched my membership from Louisville to Los Angeles, and you get this book, this nice thick book, the directory, and it has people's phone numbers in it, legends, demigods of music that I'm seeing their names in here. And I saw Claire Fisher's name and I went, oh, that can't be. There's a phone number here. So I picked up the phone. I called Claire Fisher and somehow talked my way into his house. And then he became my mentor for a while.
That's simple, huh? You just pick up the phone and die.
Man. I did. And his initial reaction was, well, I'm busy. I'm doing Stevie Wonder and Chaka Khan. I'm busy. I cannot, I don't teach. I've never taught. And so I think I said, well, can I at least just come to your front door and shake your hand? And then, of course, I talked my way in and we sat down at the piano and started working. And I told him how I've been his student for years anyway, breaking down his charts for the high-lows. And he's just an amazing guy. And so by the end of that evening, he said, okay, I'll teach you.
Right.
And so I had a teacher. Then I got even too busy for that. And I started working the studios, the TV and film studios. Right. We're happy to have a young utility guy who did not need to sleep. When you're young, you don't sleep so much.
Yeah, so, I get it.
You got the adrenaline going. So I worked every day, long days, and I was hungry because I didn't have any money. And the studios treated me like a Swiss Army multi-purpose utility tool for musical chores. Mm-hmm. And anything that remotely smelled like music, even if it was tangentially related to music, they knew they could call Wolff. Okay. To take care of the job. And in that way, I not only got more experience, but I made relationships. I met people and who respected my work, had faith in my abilities and confidence in my professionalism. And that I did that for 10 years. And after 10 years of doing chores, I realized something that, Sam, while I made plenty of money, I mean, this paid really, really well. I owned 2 houses in LA full of gear, but it was not a well-managed career. I had no control over the telephone told me every day where to go and what to do when I get there. And more importantly, no idea long-term where I was headed. So after 10 years, I started reading books about small business best practices and entrepreneurial principles, how to start a business, how to have employees, marketing, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I took all that money in the houses and stuff and sold them all and bought a building in Burbank, California, on Burbank Boulevard, right in the heart of Studio District where I wanted to be. And I sent letters to all these people who had been so kind and supportive for me for those last 10 years. And I thanked them for trusting me with those assignments. Now, stop that. I'm no longer available for those assignments. I am a composer. Here's my new business. Let's do business. And then I held my breath, Sam, because I may have just nuked the last 10 years of my life, scorched earth.
That has to be scary, but you're doing that thing that most people do. They bet on themselves. You've done the legwork. I mean, you were brought up at it as a child to some degree. And then you have been doing, as you call it, chores for the last decade. Yeah, you got to kind of step out on faith. You got to, your decade of, what they call it, the 10,000 hours, outliers. Yeah, you did
mine were more than 10,000 hours, but yeah, that's exactly the theory behind it. And I held my breath until all those letters, these had stamps and envelopes because there was no email. When they started arriving at their destinations all over Hollywood, it's like little switches flipped and people shrugged and said, gee, that's too bad. He was a good utility guy. Okay. And then they started throwing me little songwriting and composing assignments, which I had done a few of along the way during those 10 years. Sometimes people needed a song and they needed it right away, or scene need to be rescored or dance numbers, whatever.
Okay.
And I did a couple of series during those 10 years too. I started with a series called Square Pegs, which was my first.
I remember that.
You're the one.
That is a young Sarah Jessica Parker.
Yeah, it introduced Sarah Jessica Parker and Tracy Nelson and Jamie Gertz and Merritt Buttrick and me. It was a wonderful experience, and I was the composer for that show. I did every episode. I wasn't hired originally to be the composer. I was just doing more chores for some other composer in New York who was going to send me stuff, and I would orchestrate it and produce it, record it, deliver it. But apparently that was a misunderstanding, and he never showed. So I was there. I took the job. That's how I got my first music by full screen credit. Up to that point, it was always special music or additional music, or I was in the rotation of composers. For example, remember there were nighttime soaps, Dallas, Knots Landing, Falcon Crest, Colby.
Dynasty. Come on,
I was on all of them. And again, but it wasn't a steady gig. It wasn't every week. It wasn't my show.
Right.
Square Pegs was the first show that was, this is my turf. And it was a great experience for me.
Now, you name those nighttime dramas and Square Pegs. And if memory serves me right, I'm remembering the theme songs to those, and they were more quote unquote traditional.
I did not write any of those themes.
Okay. Now,
I remember, I'm still doing chores here. They're not hiring me to write themes for these big shows. I was doing the crappy jobs on those shows, which I was happy for. For example, on Square Pegs, there was one of the characters Merritt Buttrick played called Johnny Slash, and he had a band and he sang songs. And of course, I wrote all those songs, and it was music within the show. Same thing for those nighttime soaps. I wrote a bunch of, okay, here's something that I don't think has ever come up in an interview, Sam. You ready for this?
I like those. Go ahead.
I have a special distinction in Hollywood, and that is I'm probably the worst actor who ever appeared on screen. I had a recurring weekly role on Knots Landing as John the piano player.
I'm going to look that up now.
Yeah, there was a story arc with Lisa Hartman was the actress, and she was a singer. I was her sidekick. I was the musician sidekick, and boy, I was just terrible as an actor.
I'm going to look that up.
Yeah, they knew
because
me from the music department anyway. They knew me on the show because I've been doing chores for a few years on Knots Landing at this point. So they put me in at that part, not knowing how terrible I was going to be on camera. So I get this phone call one night from a wonderful director named Kim Friedman, who I was actually working with at the time on Square Pegs. And she called me at home because that's the only way you could call
yeah,
people
back then, yeah.
in 1982. And I thought she was calling about something about Square Pegs. She says, "No, I'm in the rotation of directors now for Knots Landing, and they're going through the Bible with me and talking about each of the characters. And they got to this one character, and they said, 'Oh, him. Yeah, we really like him, but don't try to direct him. He just gets worse.'" And she thought it was important that I should know what they tell visiting directors about me.
Now, here's where it gets interesting because I'm going to jump around a little bit in history. Well, I'll give you a little backstory. I have a special connection to Knots Landing, mainly because that used to be one of my mom's favorite shows. So Knots Landing was appointment television for her. If you had to be there in front of your TV when Knots Landing came on. At the time, I'm a kid. I don't really grasp a lot of the storylines. I'm just sitting there bored out of my mind. But now as I got older, you watch it and you know what's happening. And so, yeah, I'm going to look for that now. But you're also, and I'm jumping in history now. We'll get to this in a second. You're also, if memory serves me right, in Seinfeld, because I am a big Seinfeld guy. And we're going to talk about the soundtrack and all that other good stuff later. You were the piano player in Mel Torme episode, weren't you?
Yes, anything related to music on stage, I handled. This was my show, and I was jealously protective and territorial concerning Seinfeld. So yes, when I saw that Mel Torme was coming on the show, of course, I went down and accompanied him live on piano. And that was, as the kids would say, hashtag good day at work.
Sorry, before we jump into Seinfeld, I want to talk about this. You bet on yourself a little bit. You are now with Square Pegs. You're still doing chores, and then you're doing stuff for the dramas. If memory serves me right, I think you did some on 21 Jump Street around that time.
I did not work on 21 Jump Street, but I did create a bunch of source music for them, meaning when they go into a bar or a restaurant where there's cool happening, groovy music going on, I created that music. It was music that was part of the background of a scene. So yeah, that was my connection to 21 Jump Street. It was just, I did a song dump on them, and they used a bunch of episodes.
Now I got to ask this question because I'm trying to go through the timeline here of just your career and as you're going. This is one of my favorite theme songs. I need to know what you did to it. Who's the Boss?
Yeah.
That was you, right?
I loved working on Who's the Boss. It was a really great job. And I mentioned before relationships.
Right.
It has helped me establish a relationship with Tony Danza, who is very demanding. He expects people to rise to his level of professionalism and expertise and preparation. And so he and I got along great. And after that, Tony, who knows how many projects he's done after that, but until the day I retired, he had me on every single project. So I was grateful for that loyalty that Tony showed me, and I wrote several themes for shows that he produced. On Who's the Boss, in answer to your question, Sam, the theme for Who's the Boss happened 6 years before I got there. It's written by, it's a couch full of people, but the words were by the executive producers. It's a little wordy, and it's a little sing-songy. And the first thing they wanted me to do was try and man it up a little bit. Can we butch that song up a little bit, give it some testosterone?
No,
and I just
you cannot.
I cannot. I said, I'll write you a new one. And the execs were very self-aware, and they said, no, we like that that money, the royalty money from having written that song. So no, you're not. But what can you do? So I did re-record it. I produced a new version of it with David Morgan, the studio singer, and I sang it. He sang lead on it. I sang backup, and it gave it a little bit more gravitas. But that's all I had to do with that theme song. I did not create the song. But from that point on, any music on Who's the Boss, I took care of. I created.
That makes sense. Now, still going in the timeline, this is where I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, you start hitting your stride, because that late 80s, early 90s, right before Seinfeld, or during, I should say, you had Married with Children, Caroline in the City, and then later on it was Will and Grace, Perfect Strangers, and that timeline. And I want to keep Seinfeld separate.
Only because you invited me to correct you if you're wrong. I was not the composer on Perfect Strangers.
Okay.
I had been, this is before I was a full-time, I had to earn the title full-time composer.
Right.
And before that, while I was doing chores, there was a particular episode on Perfect Strangers where we actually hear a real performance of Balky's Dance of Joy.
Yeah.
And I think my memory is that the credit composers showed up on stage with it, and the director did not like it. And I could see why he didn't like it. So I happened to be around. I mean, I had other chores going on around there. So I whipped out my little pad and pencil, handed it to the musicians. And that my little composition I wrote there became the Dance of Joy on Perfect Strangers. But that was the only connection I ever had to Perfect Strangers. I was not on staff. I was not the composer.
So let me,
all those other shows I did. And just in case listeners are confused, I was the composer on 75 primetime network TV series.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote the themes for 44 of those series.
So
for example, Married with Children, which you mentioned, famously, I did not write the song Love and Marriage. It was written before I was born.
Oh, obviously. Yeah. But what I'm getting at, with Perfect Strangers, and yeah, Married with that song, that's been out for a while, but with Perfect Strangers, yeah, the thing that you did was like one of the signature components of one of the main character, or the main character. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, that's a good trade.
I'm happy that I happened to be around that day. It was a good day. It was good timing to be there, but I cannot, obviously it does not show up on any of my resumes because I was not the composer for it.
Okay, good trade, because now you're, if anything, without that season, especially, and I'm dating myself because I know this, especially when they went to Balky's home country and they started doing it all the time. Like, you had to reference that song in a good maybe half of the episodes.
I have no idea. I did see cue sheets, future cue sheets from that. Remember, I was not involved in any of that, but I saw it on cue sheets that, hey, they're still using that little ditty I wrote.
Yep.
But again, I don't want to take away from the credit of the good composers who actually were on that show. And I did have 75 of my own. I don't need to claim theirs.
Now, here's where, and this is my last question because we're about to go Seinfeld heavy.
Oh, good. I'm ready.
All right. So because I wanted to not make you quote unquote the just Seinfeld guy, but we'll get to Seinfeld everything in a second. But when you're run that late 70s, 90s run, early 90s, I should say, there were a lot of good theme songs. And I kind of alluded to this earlier. And I'm very curious, and there is no right answer to this, but I just want to see your insight. In your opinion, what makes a hit theme song for a TV show? And the second part of that question, why are they so rare now? I mean, like, it's just, you turn on TV, it's not even the themes, and to some degree, it's not even music. The show just starts with a cold open.
That's true in a lot of shows, but there are also some really good themes out there today. I should qualify that. The value of a good series theme, a unique, memorable, unmistakably recognizable series theme can serve as a signature for the show. A viewer hears a familiar theme, sometimes from another room with their head in the refrigerator, and there's a Pavlovian response. Ooh, let's watch that.
Yep.
And theme music also has entertainment value as a presentation tool, just as the theater curtain and the announcer before a performance prepare the audience for an entertainment experience. TV theme music announces each episode and heightens your sense of anticipation and draws you into that mind space you visit while watching the show. Although, you know, I don't know, for example, on The Tonight Show, we all know who the Tonight Show host is, but when the announcer announces that name, it makes the entrance more exciting somehow. And hopefully a series theme music accomplishes the same when it introduces each episode.
Okay. I mean,
was that too flowery?
You mentioned it, and you're right. And since we're talking about the Tonight Show, like the roots, even now, the hey, I like that version. It is morphed and changed over time, obviously. But there are a few themes that are still out there, but the reason is it's just rare. Meanwhile, when you talk about another era in television, they were so plentiful. Even bad shows, quote unquote, bad shows had awesome theme songs. So, I mean, it's kind of a give and take thing. It's just something, maybe it's a personal thing with me that I just wish that a little bit more. I wish that came back a little bit more. That's all.
You mentioned bad shows with good themes.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, if you look at my credits list, it's like a long death list of failed show titles. You can see behind me that long trail of mushroom clouds and blast craters behind me. You can course the chart the course of my career by that disaster path. A lot of my favorite themes died like a tree in the forest.
What was your favorite theme that you just feel like, this was it, and then the show ended immediately? I got to know what show, what was it?
There were
There's
several
no wrong
of
answers.
them.
Your mind can change tomorrow.
I really enjoyed working on, and I was happy with my work on the theme for Boston Common, which was
I love that show.
It was a clever little show. Yeah, exactly. Anthony rocked that show, as did the rest of the cast. It was cleverly written. It was a tight little show, and it performed in the ratings okay. But at that time, Sam, okay,
that's must-see TV. That's NBC. I remember that.
Yeah, okay wasn't good enough. I mean, we ruled the airwaves, and I was a part of that. I was part of several of those tentpole shows.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, Boston Common, which would have been a hit on any other network at the time, got released. And the good news is those same writers, Max and Dave, instantly, while they still had a crew and still had people, said, "Oh, we got this other show." And we all just kind of hopped on over to the new show, which was Will and Grace.
That's beautiful. But
from the ashes, is the phoenix that arose, was Will and Grace, and I got to create a lot of very naughty piano music for that show.
And a lot of, like, Will and Grace, a part of being that must-see TV family, you got to talk about the big boy, and that is Seinfeld. Because this was the Jonathan Wolff stamp, like, hey, this is new, this is different, you're, like I said, you're the unofficial member of the team. You changed the dynamic of the show. You just did. And I gotta know, how did that start? How did that come about? How did you get that job?
During my chores years, whenever there was an industry-wide strike, which happens in Hollywood every few years, I would take my thimble full of talent and my skill set and go on the road, do rock and roll tours, conduct for Vegas acts. And two of my Vegas acts, Tom Jones and Diana Ross, shared the same opening act, a brilliant comedian named George Wallace.
Yay!
George and I became really, really good friends. We became tight, and whenever he came back to LA after that, I'd go with him. He'd buy me dinner, and I'd go with him to the comedy clubs and accompany him. I wrote songs for his little act, and it was fun. It's not a little act. I wrote little songs for his big act, and he and I remained tight for all the years after that. And it turns out years later that Jerry Seinfeld in real life has a best friend named George. It's George Wallace. And that is how I met Jerry Seinfeld. Jerry called me. George told me, can my buddy Jerry call you? And I said, sure, any friend of George. And by the way, yesterday was also George Wallace's birthday. So he and I chatted a little bit, and he was having dinner with Jerry last night. So there's all, this is all fresh in my mind at the moment.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So Jerry called me and he said they were having trouble with music. I was not the first composer on what was then called the Seinfeld Chronicles. There was another guy before me, and for him, I have nothing but respect. Even the best major league hitters sometimes ground out. It happens. And he swung hard and missed. So it was next my turn at bat. And Jerry called me and he described to me the opening of this weird little show he and Larry were trying to make. And he said the opening was Jerry doing stand-up comedy in a comedy club in front of a group of people. And he tells jokes and they laugh. And he wanted signature quirky theme music to go with it. Now, remember, in the late 80s, a lot of theme music was kind of dopey, a lot of sassy saxophones and silly lyrics. Guilty, by the way. I created a bunch of that kind of music, but it was not going to work for this application. And I told Jerry that sounds like an audio conflict. So how about this? And we're still on the phone. How about if we treat your human voice telling jokes as the melody of the Seinfeld theme? And my job, Jerry, will be to accompany you in a musical way, in a fun, quirky way that does not interfere with the audio of your monologue that you're delivering. Every time you do a different monologue, it'll be a variation on the theme. Come on over. I'll show you what I mean. And he came over. It was a Saturday. I was there by myself. And I showed him, I said, the human organic quality of your voice telling jokes might go well with the human organic quality of my finger snaps and lips and tongue noises like this.
Hey.
And at any pitch, and Sam, you've done it hundreds, maybe thousands of pitches. You know that there's a point during the pitch where you got to grab their attention so they're not looking around at anything else. And that was my moment for Jerry. And I had his attention because in 1989, that was music from Mars. And sampling technology was in its infancy. And I really, really, really wanted to put it to work. So I showed him how I do that. And I built a little groove like the one you just heard out of these samples of my lips and tongues and stuff. And then I created Frankenstein sampling versions of a slap bass. And at the time, slap bass had not yet enjoyed celebrity status as a solo lead instrument. It was buried in funk music at the time. Larry Graham had been doing it for a while. I didn't invent it, but it was buried in a mix, and it was cool, and it percolated a lot of great tunes. But I put it on the table and illuminated it and used it as a lead instrument to punctuate his jokes, his lines, his lead ups. It was such a basic baseline, so simple, so sophomoric that it did not require meter, did not require 4 bars, 4 beats to the bar. I could stop it and start it to allow for Jerry's punchlines and the lengths of his jokes. And I weaved these bass rim shots, we'll call them, into each monologue. And I knew that that was going to obligate me to create a new piece of music for each monologue. And that was okay. It was kind of a fun assignment, and I really wanted to try that. I'd never heard of anyone accompanying monologues before, and creating musical elements, Lego style, that can be modularly manipulated to fit around comedy. I'd never heard of that before, and I wanted to try it. And here's the big deal. It was in order of 4 episodes. That's not an order, that's an insult. So I figured, network's not really behind this show. They're only ordering.
Round, yeah.
Yeah, and I've done a lot of work for a lot of years on a lot of shows. It's the only time in my entire career where I ever heard of an order of 4 episodes. That's pitiful. But that was how it was born. And Jerry liked it. He had brought with him, at my request, some video of him doing stand-up so I could show him how it works, how it functions as a theme. And man, he really liked it. And remember, this is 1989, so there's no Zoom, there's no. So he held the phone up to the speakers when he called Larry David and held the phone up to the speakers and played it for him through the phone. Larry approved it in that moment. And that's how it was born on that day. It was, again, a good day at work.
Now, you said something about this, and I always used to think I was crazy. And maybe you can confirm this. I used to think, and still do, every episode of Seinfeld, the theme is slightly different. They're all different.
True.
That's true.
True, because every monologue was different. There's different lengths of the overall monologue, and the jokes are all different. So I had to architect a different presentation of those elements to go along with and complement each monologue. So yeah, it was a chore I think I got them on Tuesday nights and turned it back in on Wednesday nights. So it was a good overnight project for me. Remember, there were at the time not computer, there was no digital audio. So I had to create these using human computing powers every week.
I always used to think, I'm like, is that me? Or, well, maybe it's just this one episode, and like the music during the show, like some of the stuff that I just personally love is like, you start taking the quirks of everyone else. And there's elements of the music, not just the theme, but the music of, let's take a guy like Kramer, who's just quirky manifested into a human being, but like little stuff he was doing, like a little pimp walk. He was a pimp for like an episode when he started dressing up, and like he
was an accidental pimp.
Exactly. And
he got punished for that cultural insensitivity too. He got arrested for it. Remember the last scene? I'm not a pimp. Right. But and by the way, I contributed to that slur fest with my pimp wop music. Hey, Sam, do you mind if I do a shameless plug right now?
Please go ahead.
The Seinfeld Soundtrack album is out. And of course, a fan favorite scene like that is on the record, as are a bunch of other weird Kramer moments. Since you brought up the Kramer moments, there's the chase music on Seinfeld. Serious cinematic chases became a comedy trope on the show. Right. There were a number of them. But my favorite of all of them was the cable guy chasing Kramer.
Right. I remember that
And so
episode.
I had to choose. I couldn't have an album full of Chase music, but I did choose that one to be on the album. And I also chose the one where Jerry is chasing Newman through the building is on the album too. That I treated them as if they were serious action movie chases, just because that seemed to fit as a good counterpoint to the ridiculous silliness that was going on screen, and that helped elevate the comedy. It was a trick that I didn't learn it, but it was reinforced to me by watching The Simpsons, how Alf Clausen would treat some of the silliest moments with very serious underscore, and it worked. It elevated the comedy. So there's plenty of that on the soundtrack album. It's available digitally so far. It's not in physical form, but you can find it wherever you get digital music.
And I'll make sure we put that at the front and back of the podcast and posting as well.
I appreciate it. Look at this. I'm reduced to being a shill.
No, you look, that is your claim to fame. The reason I wanted to talk about Seinfeld separately, I'm glad you talked about the soundtrack. I have heard this. Well, I own the soundtrack. I have heard it.
Oh, good. You're the one.
Yeah. I mean, like, I am good with it. One of the things, because since you were big in the music of that, not just your own personal things, but you were the curator of music during the show. And some of the music that you have done, you have now, fans like myself have tattooed different moments of that. Like, I can't hear Earth, Wind, and Fire without thinking about the Elaine dance.
Agreed. Me too. When I hear Shining Star, yeah.
When I hear Shining Star from Earth, Wind, and Fire, there is a little chuckle. For starters, it's a great song, but the absurdness of her dancing with that song, and I'm like, wow, because even though the whole point is that she can't dance, it somehow moves with the rhythm of the song. She's snapping her fingers. She's doing all the no-nos you're supposed to do while dancing. The elbow thing. Even today, if I heard that song right now, I'm thinking about the Elaine dance.
Yeah. Just to clarify, I was not the one who chose that. If it was up to me, I would have written a particular song for that, and I probably did. But that became a weird point of focus and contention in the production office and at the studio and network level. It was just so broad. The comedy was just so weird. Why would all of a sudden Elaine look like she was having, I don't know, some kind of seizure?
Right.
A full body heaves at the
They
music.
said it was a full body dry heave. Yeah.
Dry heave, yeah. So my music editor, Jack Diamond, who is my right-hand man and truly a genius, he came up with, there were probably 30 different choices for that scene. Remember, there's no dialogue over it, right. So we could replace the music however we wanted. And so my memory is that I didn't even go to the meeting. He went and presented his choices in picture with it, and they chose Shining Star. And at this point, we had a little money. We could afford the master license.
Now, I'm curious about this. Seinfeld that's your baby. That's where, I mean, all your work culminated into this massive show, and your fingerprints were all on it. I always wanted to know, have that kind of became like for lack of a better term, just Mulestone or albatross for you, because you were unofficially known as the Quirky Music Guy for a good chunk of that time.
Yeah, I was flavor of the month for a long time.
So if you're quote unquote Quirky Music Guy, did that stop future things, or did people look back at your work, or was it kind of like he could do this and he could do this too, or were you just typecast as Quirky Music Guy for a good chunk of time?
I didn't care what you called me as long as you called me. It was a calling card, and it was in my deck, so I played it over and over again. And I liked that a lot of my music was weird and unusual. And it gave, after Seinfeld became a hit,
Mhm.
it gave me a lot of latitude. People were willing to hear with open ears music that normally, for me, that normally they wouldn't have, because to create a new species of music requires breaking some rules. And not everyone in the approval food chain is open to such risk taking. But because of the success of Seinfeld, it opened the door for me to do some more of that. Now, Seinfeld is 30 plus years ago.
Yeah.
I retired in 2005. And since then, yes, most of those other, you call it an albatross, I'll call it a badge of honor.
Right.
Most of those have fallen away. And what we're left with is my connection to Seinfeld. And I'm proud of it and I'm happy for it. And I actually propagate it. My website, all my social media is Seinfeld Music Guy. Anyone who wants to come join me on Instagram, that's how you find me. So I
How do they
embrace
find
it.
you on music? Just all Seinfeld Music Guy, all of it? I thought it was just Instagram.
No, Instagram is Seinfeld Music Guy. Same thing for Facebook. And I just started using Reddit because I did yesterday an AMA. I had to look that up. It's Ask Me Anything. And that's also my handle there. YouTube, same thing. I'm easy to find.
Okay.
It's subtle, right, Sam?
Yeah,
Seinfeld
very.
music? Very subtle. So I embrace that at the end of all, 75 series plus all the ones I did before I was a composer, I'm happy that that's the one that people will remember me for. Because as I said, that was kind of a Camelot era of TV and
Yep.
a highlight era of my career.
Now, is one more I remember you from. And this is, I affectionately called it because you have that background, whether it been pop music, funk music, soul music, then the TV world. But one of the things that it should get more shine that I thought, because just me as a fan of this show, you wrote the theme for the first two seasons of the Hughleys on ABC. And this was like the tail end of TGI Friday. This was the tail end of that. We're all growing up. I had stuff to do on Friday nights now. I'm a teenager now. But I remember your theme specifically because of the slap bass element of that theme, where I was just kind of like, hey, this is a Seinfeld copycat. And then you look at the notes. Oh, well, this is why it's a Seinfeld copycat, because the same guy who made it. So were there other themes? Well, obviously you made other themes, but it plays such a role in you that it kind of jumped and weaved its way into other projects.
Yeah, the slap bass was in that production, but it was not a key role. It was not featured. It was buried in the mix like it should have been.
Mm-hmm.
I had, at that point, one of my longtime employees, Paul Buckley, who is just a masterful musician. He had elevated himself to be a collaborator with me. And my memory is that we were not supposed to do the theme for the Hughleys. DL was friends with somebody who was going to do it. And I said, that's cool. We'll do the episodes, but here's a little placeholder, a temporary one until it shows up. And the producers really liked it. So it became the accidental theme for the Hughleys. And my memory is that Paul had more to do with it than I did. And I knew Daryl from before. He and I had done, again, this is a failed series, but a wonderful series with a theme that I'm really proud of, a show called Double Rush.
I vaguely remember that. Wasn't that the
John
Bike
Pasquarelli?
Messengers? It was
Yeah,
something.
exactly. Exactly. And Diane English hired me. It was my first project for Diane English, which she is, a legend. She's a titan of comedy. She created Murphy Brown. And she hired me and let me run with it. Remember, this was sampling technology was still not real mainstream. And I pitched her this. What if I sample my bike? If I take sounds from the bike can make all of the derailleur clunking, the tires squealing, and the chain, and all these different things sounds a bike make. And when you ride a bike, there's something rhythmic and hypnotic about the sounds that the bike's making with your body. It becomes with you, and the sound of your breathing. And so I pitched that to her, that I'm going to build a frantic, high energy, frazzle theme song for you built around that. And then I incorporated into it the sounds of the city whizzing by, and Doppler effects, and people shouting, and horn honks and jackhammers like New York City sounds. And from the time of that meeting until it was done, Diane English left me alone until it was done. And I called her up and said, Diane, you ready for a listen? And she came over, she sat down at my console, and I pushed play, and she was kind of blown away. And she said, let me hear that again. And I played it through again. And she goes, thank you, we're done. She placed confidence in her. And this is a lesson to all you producer, director people out there, filmmaker people. Hire someone that you have confidence in. You don't hire a dog, then teach it how to bark. You let the dog bark. So she did that, and it's kind of rare that happens. Usually you got people saying, oh, the music should sound like. And it doesn't matter how that sentence ends, Sam, because it's already derivative music, because it sounds like.
Right.
She did not do that. She had faith. There was no demo. I couldn't demo. I hadn't built the instrument yet. I had to build the plane while I was flying it to create this bicycle thing. And it was awesome. Then she turned it over to an unknown young guerrilla filmmaker named Spike Jonze.
Oh, whatever happened to him? Man.
Oh, big, huge.
I know.
Yeah, huge blockbuster, giant film director. But at the time, he went out on his skateboard and grabbed hold of taxis, no permits. He just, did guerrilla filmmaking and built, well, with my theme in his headphones, by the way. And he built this amazing main title around this music that I made. And so that was a very satisfying project. And it was one of those failed shows that no one ever saw. But it was my first time meeting D.L. Hughley, who was a very young, hot, he was just on fire on camera. And so later, when the Hughleys came about, I was really happy to see him starring in his own show. And now, of course, he is, everywhere. He is a spokesperson for smart people everywhere. But that is, the Hughleys was a fun job too. We started on ABC, and I think we continued on UPN. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think that it was a switch in there. I remember that.
And it was fun, except we did that one ridiculous episode that was a Jack and the Beanstalk thing, because it was a thing in those days to do musical episodes. we did one, and it was fun and it was challenging. And it got greenlit while I was at the hospital having my second child with my wife. So I turned that episode over to Paul, in case anyone is familiar with the Jack and the Beanstalk episode. Paul Buckley wrote most of those songs, and I picked up the last few after I got out of the hospital.
In theory, you had 2 babies that day.
I did. Well, it was a weird time to be having kids and be doing 10, 12 episodes a week.
Okay. Well, I'm curious. You were doing great in your career. It's awesome. What made you decide to just hang it up, retire? What made you want to put your jersey in the rafters? I did it. I'm done. I'm curious. What was the thing?
Well, nice segue, because I just talked about having a kid. Working that many shows, you don't get 75 shows by doing them one at a time. So I was working ridiculously long hours getting all this music out for all these shows. And that's really good for business, but not good for one's home life. And my wife and I, we were just having way too many kids. And we agreed that at some point those kids needed me more than Hollywood needed more of my music. We had plenty of money, so we picked a date. This was the year 2000, and we said 5 years. Everybody, 5 years. I told my clients, I told my employees, 2005, Wolff becomes a pumpkin, and I went into Hollywood witness protection in 2005, and we moved back to Kentucky, where I became a normal, quiet life, stay-at-home dad, PTA room parent, field trip chaperone, sports coach, volunteer. And that is why I pulled the plug. Now, it was a little bit sad in 2005 to walk away from some really hot shows. There was one more year of Will and Grace. I walked away from it. And there was Reba. How much fun was it to work for Reba McEntire?
Yeah, that was like one of the last good theme songs. That era of time. Oh, I remember that.
Well, to clarify, that theme song is a song off of one of her records.
Right.
But I rearranged it. I created the recording of it. But when it was time for me to leave, what's that?
No, the name of the song, Survivor. It's a remix.
Correct. Yeah. I did not write that song. But Reba understood, and she wished me well, as did the Will and Grace people. So we left. And, my folks at my office were highly trained, well qualified to take over all of those assignments. And so I gave away my clients before I shut the door. So I had nothing to come back to anyway. It was kind of retirement insurance. Yeah. And that's what I did for the next 10 years or so. You're probably good at math, Sam, and you realize those kids are now grown and they don't need me 24/7. So I've started doing new things. Like when they went away to college, I could no longer bring them glue sticks and juice boxes to their class. So I started lecturing at their colleges as a guest lecturer, and that kind of became wildfire, and I became a full-time college lecturer, a really failed retiree. By the way, here's a useless factoid, Sam. I have lectured at every Ivy League school.
That's cool.
And that we're including law schools. I've lectured at Harvard Law and Cornell Law, UPenn Law, Columbia Law. Most of my lectures before COVID were law schools. I know that's weird too, because I never went to college,
but here's the thing. I was just about to get there. I was just like, it's the thing. You learned the business kind of in the guerrilla style yourself. You you didn't go to college, but you got a chance to have firsthand experience. And I guess it's good that not only did you lecture or teach law, because instead of quote unquote knowing the books, you were operating from those rules from a very, hands-on place in your life.
Correct. Yeah, and that is the approach I take. I don't come at it as a legal expert because like Harvard Law needs another legal genius. But more from the standpoint of the way it was applied in my career and my view of intellectual properties, copyrights, contractual rights, publishing, licensing, royalties. Those subjects I became expert on through I wasn't representing anybody else. It was me and my income and my family involved. So I became fairly well versed at those intricacies, and that's why they invite me to do that. And I do some corporate speaking and performing now. I also do concerts. I don't know if you've seen any of my ridiculous videos on Instagram at the piano, but
I have actually.
I still play pretty good. So I incorporate those business teachings into my corporate performances. Again, this was all before COVID, but someday I'll get back to it. So that's what I'm doing now. And that's a long answer to your short question, Sam. Sorry for blathering and prattling. Feel free to edit this down however you want.
I want the whole thing, because
Counting
This
on you to
is
make me sound lucid.
no, this is good. I would hope that a lecturer can talk. So yeah, I mean, one of the things, and we're wrapping it up. And I saw your TED talk and I learned a lot from that. But I know a lot of people are listening who may be that 17-year-old wide-eyed kid who are good at anything. And now in this age, when you talk about copyright and patents and learning things, because everyone in the age of social media, you got a YouTube page, it's welcome for you to create TikTok, whatever you got. So I guess what I'm asking is, what advice would you give that 17-year-old wide-eyed kid who think they're good at a thing and probably try to forge a career like you did? What would you say to them?
The same thing I said to my son, who, like me, is kind of short and scrawny. But when he was 7 years old, he planned to be in the NBA. I said, tell you what, if you get $7 million for your rookie career before you go to college, because at the time you could do that,
Right.
$7 million. If it's 6 million something, no, you go to college. But if it's 7 million or more, you take that 7 million, I'll help you invest it. And when that career ends, you can go back to college. I would give the same type of advice, is that if you are already, if you've got an acumen for it, if you've got a following, if you're making money, real money, career money on this, go for it. College is not for everyone. But in the absence of that clear path to success, go to college. It's really fun. It's wonderful. It's what I love about going to all these college campuses as a guest lecturer, is that this is a real growth spurt for a lot of young people. Right. Take advantage of that, gain more experience, get more connections. Don't follow my footsteps, because here is telling truth. I did not exhale until I retired, because I knew I did not have a college degree. I had no fallback. I'm only good at one thing, music. And if that didn't work out, I'm tearing tickets at a tilt-a-whirl.
Yep. So I get it. I totally understand. Well, Jonathan, I want to thank you so much for just taking some time out, just being on the podcast. This is a great talk. I feel great about this. That I will make sure, give the big plug one more time. It's called the Seinfeld Soundtrack. You can get it wherever digital music can be found. I welcome you to listen to it. Mainly, I welcome you to listen to it and go back and watch the corresponding shows. That's how deep I went. And
it's real and it's spectacular.
Yes, it is. Jackie Charles me. Oh man.
No, that's not Jackie. That was Terry Hatcher. But you believe me,
hold on. She did say, Terry said it, but he was the foil at the end of the episode when they tried to find out, where it's just like they are real. End of the series, not episode. I can sit down and talk Seinfeld with you all day.
Oh, right. Because he ends up in bed with Terry.
Exactly.
You're completely right in the finale. I totally blanked on that. You're right.
Yeah. He answered that question that they were trying to find out. Oh man, like even little stuff like that. Like, and I'll give you this. I tried to Weekend Warrior this week, and just out in the yard doing yard work. I bumped my knee, and I went to Rite Aid and I got Tiger Balm. Me and my brother went.
Who told you to put the bomb on?
Who told you to put the bomb on? I didn't tell you to put the bomb. Oh my, we do that. That show is so just ingrained in the lexicon of how we operate. Just like I'm talking about me and my brother. But I'm so sure throughout just whoever watched it, you've taken away a chip of that with you, and you're going to use it in your, like, double dip. Who told you to double dip the chip?
That's like putting your whole mouth in the dip.
Exactly. Oh my God. I could talk Seinfeld with you all day.
Oh,
I don't want to
speak
do that.
I speak sign language. Yeah, we're good.
I have that book. That's Jonathan. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. One more time.
I really enjoyed this, and you are so good looking.
This was awesome. The Seinfeld soundtrack. Get it wherever you get music. Thanks again. And oh man, this was awesome. Thanks for being on the podcast.
My pleasure.
Have a good one, Jonathan.